Welcome to the Tabernacle podcast. I am with Martin Rizzi, Matt Hughes. My name's Adam Ray, and we have a special guest that we will be introducing here in just a couple of moments. Before we get to that, can you guys believe that we are in our final 2 weeks? By the time this podcast airs, we'll be coming into our final week of our First Kings series. So if you've been missing out on the First Kings series, I would encourage you to tune in, check those sermons out over the past 8 months?
It's been a haul, yeah.
But this week we're in 1 Kings 21. By the time this podcast airs, 1 Kings 22 will be the final sermon. Dr. John Vermiglia will be preaching that. I call him Doctor all the time, and he laughs. And I think that if anyone earned an honorary one by this point, it would be someone like him. But who knows?
It's reasonable. I'm glad to know that he still works here.
He does.
Summertime is a tough time for him. And as much as we like to joke that he's on vacation, I think the message he sent me last was 23 times preaching in like the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's insane to me. I'm excited when I get to preach. I am, and it's like I get to preach 3 times this weekend, and maybe like if I've got something else going, maybe it's like 4 or 5 times in a week. It's like, wow, that was a lot. Like I'm physically drained. And John's like, 23 times in the last 2 weeks. I'm like, how do you still have words?
Yeah.
How do you still have any? Yeah, it's impressive.
There's a concept of being ministry tired, where you're like, okay, I've poured out, and we're going to see fruit from that. God is faithful when we honor Him in our labors. I think there's also ministry exhaustion. That might be where he's at. I loved Darcy this week posted on Facebook something to the effect of 23 times in 2 weeks he will be completely unfiltered. Bring cameras when he gets back. So
it's so true. The best part is he comes back just full of ideas because between sermons he's somewhere else. Like he doesn't have his family there, and he can just come up with these crazy new ideas. And so like the first or second staff meeting when he's back, like the first one, you can see him trying to taper it. And the second one, he's like, so guys, I've got an idea. And everybody braces for impact. And it's like, all right, so we're launching another campus. Like what comes next here?
That's perfect.
So just before we jump totally in, I got to confess, when you said that we're 2 weeks out from the end of Kings, I had to go check the number of chapters in First Kings and go, oh yeah, we are.
Yeah.
And that means a new series on the horizon.
A new series on the horizon. It's called the Stronger series. Whatever visualizations that just came to mind when I said that, they are not where we're going with that series. It is not about weightlifting. There's no iron pumping, although there could be potentially a illustration or two in that space. But looking forward to it. Stronger faith, stronger family, stronger church, stronger citizen. Those are just some of the ones I can remember off the top of my head. And that'll be, I believe that's 6-week series.
Yeah.
We often are exegetical in our presentation of Scripture.
That means we're just going through books of the Bible.
Yep.
For those laymen out there.
And this one will be a particularly topical, obviously still strongly biblically based, and we'll be building each of those sermons out of a particular text, not necessarily the flow of text. And so we look forward to that series. And then are we allowed to announce what comes after that?
I don't know. I think we just announced Stronger for the first time, which is cool because I always think that the podcast listeners deserve those little nuggets, to be one step ahead of things.
They're our faithful.
So by all means, you want to throw it out there.
I do. I want to throw it out there.
You're the executive pastor.
We're gonna kind of force us to lock into this idea.
Right.
Often when we go from an Old Testament passage or Old Testament book, we'll then move into a New Testament book. So next is 2 Corinthians. We've done 1 Corinthians, so we'll dive into 2 Corinthians. There's some very key passages in 2 Corinthians that I cannot wait to get to. If I get dibs on any of the passages to preach, there will be a few that I'll at least pencil my name into. So please, can I do that one?
I want there to be dibs.
Yeah.
But with no further ado, we are fortunate today. We get the opportunity to do a changed life story. These tend to be what most of our listeners, our watchers, enjoy the most because they just love getting to know people throughout the church. And sometimes it's staff members Oftentimes we get the opportunity to interview somebody out there, and this is one that I asked specifically for because in some conversations, I just started to realize that there was way more to a human being than I had ever realized, and fairly limited conversation, so I'm sure there'll be a ton that I'll get to learn today. But with no further ado, we will be interviewing today a member of our Manistee congregation, the owner of Lakeshore Construction, a general philanthropist, great guy, a guy with way better hair than I ever had when I had it. And I'm not sure how to explain this one, but a guy that plays the keyboard on top of doing all those other things. Gary Buren, thank you for being a guest with us today. Excited to hear from you. And what do we call? Are you a pianist? Is that what we?
That almost sounds like you shouldn't say it here.
Right, I know.
Sorry.
If we were
exactly
in a church
the thought
20
that I
years
had.
ago, yeah, we either could or could not say that.
Pianist.
Pianist.
Yeah.
Okay. The emphasis is on, okay.
Yeah.
Well, today we do keyboards because they do so much more. Just a piano that we have in our minds of what we used to do back in the old church days, which I didn't do. My mom did that.
Really?
She did that.
Okay.
But we do the keyboards now. And it's just a lot more versatile. Gives us some different sounds, some more depth in sound, and so on.
I just don't think that most of our listeners go, the owner of a large construction company that spans quite a ways, also a musically inclined gentleman that, I mean, every time I'm over there, I feel like you're on the keys, which is pretty awesome because they've got some amazing musicians in Manistee. I'm just saying, Buckley, Cadillac, if you haven't been to Manistee yet, get over there. You'll be blessed to listen to David Hoflinger lead worship. That Carly, the team over there is phenomenal. They're all pretty
They
amazing.
even have
Great team.
they even have a cellist.
Right.
Kevin plays the
Kevin,
cello
yeah.
over there, and
Oh man,
Fred
he's
on the
awesome.
guitar. Like
Yep.
these guys are impressive, man.
Yeah.
Listening to them play is just remarkable.
Good.
And it's outside of my normal box, or at least it used to be. So it's a totally different experience.
yeah, it's good. The very first time that I was at the Manistee campus, Gary was on the keys, and I'm just introducing myself, getting to know people, and so I came back to Buckley campus. John's like, "Oh yeah, who was on worship this weekend?" So I was like, "Well, Gary was the guy's name on keys, and Andy was the guy on drums, and Carly was singing with David, and then he's, oh yeah, you know who Gary is?" And I'm like, "Gary." Yeah, I don't know who Gary is. And so then he fills me in on everything and just the incredible blessing that you've been to the ministry of the Tabernacle. And so then I was like, man, I wish I'd have known who Gary was when I was there. Like I would have thanked him in person. So.
But that's exactly where, to me, this conversation begins. Is you wouldn't know. You'd have no clue that Gary owns a company, that Gary, any of the other things that he does. Like the first time I met him, other than the fact that he had a strong handshake, I was just like, okay, this guy seems really personable. His wife seems sweet. Like the conversation was just really easy. And then it took a lot of like connection points and conversations. You start to put the pieces together, and Lakeshore has been a great company, really partnered well with the Tabernacle. So getting to work through some of those different avenues, I'm sitting in the green room one day. That's where this really began for me. And the green room is the room in the back where like the band goes and listens to the sermon and is able to just relax during the messages.
Kind of listens to the sermon.
Kind of listens,
Yeah,
depending. In Manistee, they actually listen to the sermon.
Okay, that's good.
Sometimes.
That's
But Gary walks in, and I'm just trying to like kill some of Dan Funk's egg bake, like just trying to get some protein in, as we're sitting there. And we sit down, and I just like, hey, would you tell me a little bit about you? And the story was remarkable, and we're going to jump right into that here in just a second. But what blew my mind was, as I'm listening to it, I see these three distinct things, and I've become kind of structured in like, oh, I see a podcast in this. Because getting to help schedule it now, I'm like, oh, this is a guy that we want to hear from. And I realized right away, I was like, there's multiple podcasts here. So there's a good chance we're going to see Gary again, if he's willing, because we could talk all day just about how God's worked in your personal life. But how he's worked in your business life and your business philosophy, to me, is fascinating. Maybe we get to it all today. We'll see how the conversation goes. But I've never met somebody in the business world that has been as successful as you have, that is more directly, this is how our faith plays into the workplace. And that was really cool for me. So we'll see if we get there. But to hand over the microphone, Gary, I'm curious. I want our listeners to know kind of where this began for you. Like, we typically start out by what's your earliest memory. I think that's crazy because I don't have a memory. So I'm going to ask it a little differently. But what were the early years like for Gary Buren? What was your family life like? Was it a faith-based family? Did you stumble into this? Were you rich? Were you poor? What did life look like as a kid?
Yeah, thank you. And it's an honor to be here, first off, and I just enjoy this time. You're great. And so I'm hoping this conversation we have just continues to be an easy one. And to start off, I just thank you for starting way back there, because that's foundational. I had a great family. Like every family, we had our ups and downs. There were things that were they're probably not so good, not so bad. I don't know if we were rich or poor. That was never an issue. I never knew. Never knew. Looking back, we didn't have anything. My dad was a pastor. He was a Baptist pastor.
Amen.
And so we were raised. They used to make fun of myself in that we were raised on the church pew. That's why I have the square head and all that stuff, because that's where you sleep. And so that's how things kind of grew up. And my dad was just an amazing man. Has always been my hero. And it was, just thinking back of all those times. He became ordained in the Baptist church. He took on a small mission church, a little mission plant. My mom played the piano. We talked about that. She played the piano. My dad would preach. And oftentimes it was our family in the church until we were able to bring some people in, and the little church grew. We were like banging it out there. We were like 20, 30 people outside our family, and that was awesome. But just a tight community, and always just a neat time. And those were in the young days. And it was just prior to that time, my dad making a commitment to become a pastor, is when I realized that I need this. It was in a service in the Baptist church when I leaned over to Dad and said, I need Jesus in my life. I need to make that decision today. Mom, of course, on the other side of him just started crying, like moms do, and she was always really good at that. We even tease her today, like, who's going to be the first one to make Mom cry? So, but that's how that all started. I did give my life to Christ at an early age.
Do you have an idea what age that was?
Yeah, I was 8 years old.
8 years old?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So there was just a lot of things that happened after that. Church change. My dad took on a church in central Illinois, which is where I grew up. Just a quick story. I went through high school, junior college, Illinois State, all that in Illinois. So I'm an Illinois guy. So we look at the corn-fed deer.
I was literally thinking that in my mind, and I'm like,
I
this
heard
is
it.
not the time or the place. Let's go.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It's always the time and the place.
So that was always something to look forward to as well. But then, just kind of going through and growing up in Illinois, in the Baptist church there. My dad, again, I got to lean back on him a little bit. As he studied, as he read, as he dug deeper into the Word, realized that there needed to be more. He wanted more. And he started some preaching things like God is real today, not just about what we do in all the rhetoric and just the history and all this kind of stuff, but we need to make this real, like today, every day, making God real in our life. And it somehow conflicted with what the Baptists thought that needed to be preached. And all of a sudden, they had one Sunday morning, had a vote, and we saw people that were members of the church that we had never seen. And it's a church story. Some are good, some not so good. This is one that really worked out awesomely for everyone. The Baptist church got to do what they wanted to do. My dad was voted out of the church that day. The next Sunday, we had church in our house, and we had over 60 people in our little house. That now, looking back as a builder and a construction guy, that was not safe for that house. But things kind of grew and changed from that point. So he then just continued to develop his ministry, of which we were a part. I got to sing and lead worship and all that kind of stuff as we grew up and all that. So it just kind of was a natural thing in the family. That's kind of what we did. So that was kind of great.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was good.
I love that you can look back at that and see God's hand in your dad being voted out of a church. Because as I'm listening to this, not growing up in church world, I'm like, that must have been terrible. Like, I'm sure that there was moments of doubt, confusion, frustration for dad and family, but to see how God used it, and then all of a sudden, church is now in our living room. That's exciting, but also terrifying. I met your mom once, and I'm trying to remember. She's got a cool name. Is it Dixie? Yeah, Dixie. But she is an energetic woman. I can only imagine that, like, she saw 60 people in her house and probably just started cooking and loving it. Like,
I love Mom to death, but we don't let her cook.
Okay. Dixie, if you're listening,
Sorry,
he
Mom.
loves you. I can see the smile on his face.
Yeah.
Don't kill him.
That's perfect. Yeah, it's interesting when you think of the, typically if you were to process the hurts that are involved, your dad's in the middle of building a ministry, there's sacrifice that's gone on. Not only are they sacrificing for the cause of growing that local ministry, but you share about the tears in mom's eyes when her child comes to a saving knowledge of Christ. If they are like most parents, they're pleading with God for that day. More important than anything else that's in that child's life is their decision to come to Christ and watching them submit to the leading of the Holy Spirit. I can specifically remember those moments as a dad when your son or daughter comes to you and they have 2 of the 3 times it's under my own preaching, and powerful stuff. But in the midst of all that, they're ministering to you. And the ministry of hardship in a space where dad is voted out and has to take up residence in his own home, the fruit of having a right perspective of who God is through all of that is their children. And so I don't know your dad, but I can make some guesses about his character because of those spaces and what has happened in your life. So really, really powerful stuff. Good.
Yeah,
So
going back to my dad, and sorry, Marty, but you mentioned 1 Kings, and we talked briefly about what was your favorite part, just to take everybody off guard. Yeah, let's loosen this up a little bit. My favorite part, of course, for me, is the story of Elijah, because it relates again back to my father, and we used to talk about how he was going to go. He shared stories about how he wanted to go and leave Earth, and even back then. And one day, we were not golfers, but we happened to be golfing, and we were laying on the backside of the 3rd tee. That's about as far as we made it that day, and we're just laying there and enjoying the sun and talking. One of my most awesome memories with my dad, and we were talking about those kinds of things. And he says, I want to go like Elijah. That would be like totally cool. He said, I don't know about the horses and the chariots and the chariots of fire. He says, kind of cool. But I think a Mustang convertible would be really good. We've always been a Ford family, still am. But that was his vision, and talked about it in that way, and just brought that just to life, into a reality to me in a different way. And so we started talking about Elijah and the chariots of, like, oh, yeah, Dad. Now, he didn't get to go that way. That's a whole nother story that we can get into in a different day, but didn't work out that way for him. The end of his life was much different.
Yeah.
And I'll say that. So, but anyway, the stories that he was able to bring to life for me, like his Elijah and the chariots of fire turning into the Mustang and go, it was incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That was my favorite part.
Yep.
Well, that's what it's supposed to look like as we walk down the road, as we lay in the grass in the sun. We're just talking about God and what he's doing in our life. This doesn't have to be a sermon, right? Some parents I think out there are like, I gotta teach the word the way that Adam Ray teaches it from the stage. Nah, just talk about God and
Please
how cool
don't.
it is. Yeah.
It's a terrifying thought.
Your kid will get bored, I promise. Even with Adam Ray's energy. So Gary, in this time period, though, your dad has been let go. The church essentially is in your home, but there's all this going on. Was there a time of discouragement or frustration for you? Like, was there a time in which you kind of distanced from God in the midst of that, seeing it, any rebellion, any frustration as that went?
I'm a preacher's kid. I had rebellion.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. As I grew up, I grew away.
Okay.
And went through some really challenging times, as I felt that business and the calling of whatever was more important. So yeah, definitely drifted away from faith, and it was just a lot of things bouncing around, mistake after mistake, not being grounded in much of anything, but only occasionally being drawn back into a church because I knew it needed to be there. And, occasionally get back into church, drawn in through music, perhaps sometimes, some other times just from people that I knew and associated with. So yeah, it wasn't always pretty. And, the home family and everything's all really, really nice. Yeah.
But life in the reality wasn't going great. And I don't always like to poke and prod at these places, but rebellion looks different for all of us. Most people can't relate to my story. There was a bit of an extreme there, especially church folk. I find that there's almost almost shock and awe of where I lived and what I did and some of the direction I went. Even my wife often, we were talking with somebody last night, and she pointed out, she's like, well, I understand why he's messed up. Like, he actually had a difficult childhood. I'm like, well, thanks, hon. I appreciate the empathy there.
My favorite thing was that in a podcast, he just casually drops, well, I've been arrested 6 times. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, waiting for the punchline. I'm like, oh, he's for real.
Okay. That's
we need to figure out what that means later on.
Adam's like, so how do we handle our hiring process here?
It hasn't been 7. So
yeah, 7's the magic number.
It's been a long
Check
time.
with HR.
Yeah. But for what it's worth, what did that rebellion and that drifting away look like? Like, what were some of the things that were, if you're comfortable talking about, that you kept bumping into? You mentioned business and kind of this, maybe a draw to something that you were looking for in that.
It was more of a personal life, a personal desire. First off, I never really got lost into illegal stuff, drugs, and all that was not a part. I'm just kind of a boring guy. But what did happen was that the loss of focus was that I knew who Jesus should be in my life and ignored that. And when you ignore those things that are direct, you pay the consequences of that, because it totally affects all of your decision making. So even though sometimes there's a black and a white, there's a right and a wrong. Other times, well, I'm going to just push this right just enough to that. Oops, it slipped off. Oh, come back. And to where no decision is really a good decision. And that's where I was. Even more probably a destructive place than if I had just totally crashed. Because it's harder to get out of that. If you totally crash and you've got this to look forward to, and then through other ministries, I've seen that, and I've worked with men, I've worked with people who have done that, and to be able to walk with them through and help with the healing process and all that. But when you never really totally crash, you've always got the excuses that, yeah, I didn't do that, but I didn't do that either, so I'm just going to live right here in the middle, which the Bible clearly speaks to, as we've talked here recently. But man, that is not a good place.
Right.
And that's where I was.
Yeah. I mean, when you say that the Bible speaks to that, immediately I'm drawn to Revelation 3. I know your deeds, that you're neither hot nor cold.
Yeah,
You were
exactly.
lukewarm, and I spit you out of my mouth. What a vivid picture Scripture gives of this idea of, I know who God is, and I'm just not really all that into it. I'm going to live my life the way that I want to live. And I think that that's a trap. And one, I'm glad that your story, or you said I'm just a little boring that way. I'm hopeful that my kids have a boring testimony too, by the way. That's the
Mhm.
goal. But I'm just as fearful for that same lukewarm faith. And I think that it's much more relatable if we're honest, right? Not everybody was a drug dealer. Not everybody had a major crash in their life. Not everybody has been arrested 6 times. But we can all relate to the fact that there are times in our life, seasons if nothing else, where we become complacent or lukewarm toward the faith and the salvation that God has given us. Um, but what's hard for me is I find that it's a trap, because all of a sudden we get lulled into it and we don't even realize it exists. Because the further distant we get from the truth, the less that conviction is in our hearts. Most people, I think, probably based on Scripture and what it says about a narrow gate, never come out of that. So for you, how do you realize that you're in that place and something's got to change? Like, where is this point in which you're looking in the mirror going, life's fine. The family life's fine. Nobody's noticing. You haven't been arrested. Like, nobody's telling you got to fix life too terribly, right? What changes?
Yeah, just a need. I think one of the things that happened was I met my wife.
They do that.
Yeah, they do that, and so to this day she reminds me of that, or I remind her, just depending on the situation. But we knew that together we were stronger as three. That was something that I had grown up with, and because I'd been through other relationships, that when Cheryl and I met, it was just something we started off. We were going to church, and that came as part. I was going to church in Grand Rapids, driving to Grand Rapids every Sunday, partly to be with my family because my mom and dad were there at the time, brother. So we go hang out and just give some family time, which I needed. Again, coming from a dark place, going through a bunch of garbage, self-inflicted things, business and personal stuff, that I needed that. I was drawn back to family, back to church. And then Cheryl went with me. So ended up, we got involved with the church locally in Manistee. And that just kind of ended up, we were married there, and kind of grew together in our faith there at that church. So it was coming out of that dark time, a realization that I needed. Now I want to be responsible to my wife, the things that we're doing. So that was really kind of the nudge that I needed. Like, this has got to become real. So that's where that kind of came from. Thanks, hon.
Yeah. It's amazing how often we get shout outs to a wife in the midst of this, because the realization of how God uses that helpmeet in our life, give us the nudge, remind us that life is real and it's not just some toy box that we get to play in.
Do you feel like, even when you consider your own faith experience and the growth that's there, a lot of times, especially in homes that have a high level of faith, for lack of a more clarifying word, but they have a high level of faith. You're in church consistently. Dad is focused on ministry. So there's this constant, not only expectation, but just kind of, you can cruise through life having a sense of faith and a knowledge of faith. You're embarking on this journey, but it's surrounded by a family experience. Mom and dad are leading you, and then there's a freedom that comes. Did you find that all of the sudden, man, I really haven't made this faith my own? It's because you stated that it really became real to you, but that faith hasn't really become my own, and now I'm searching, I'm kind of flailing a little bit here until Cheryl comes into the picture, and it's kind of like, wow, this has to become real. I can see the direction that I'm headed apart from Christ, and I need to make this real. Is it kind of that experience, or is it just a conscientious choice to run after leaving home?
Wow. That was pretty deep. Thank you. And you're right. I got to speak to a couple things. It again is so easy coming from church and the stability and all that the family brings, and my dad brought and all that, because I mean that's just who he was and what he was. Just certainly a caring and giving man from day one. Stories I could tell endlessly after we left the church. He started his other church, bought a new church building. He became intimately involved with helping the homeless, the lost, the drunks. So the police would come and drop guys off at our doorsteps at 2 a.m. and, Gary, let's go. We got to take care of this guy. So all that stuff, and that was how all that kind of came about for such a long time. And then when I got into the business world, walking away from that, moved away from home, then all of a sudden I had a lot of freedom. But the freedom, the choices that I made for freedom were not the way they should have been. I didn't express freedom in my faith. That became secondary to everything that I did. I certainly didn't forget it. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden it was not as important as being with friends and hanging out, working, and just doing stupid things. So that just continued for such a long time. And again, that's what I talk about. You don't make good choices, and that's where that was. So,
yeah, that sounds very common and very real. But the truth is, we're all trying to sort out what our faith looks like individually, and I can't even fathom what it would be like to have a father like that. Now, not to get into the sob story of not really having a father, but as I hear you talk about your dad, I'm like, that's a remarkable picture. However, it's, as with all of us, to some extent, it's just your life. I don't want to say take it for granted, but at some point it's like, no, I've just got a great dad. He's leading in faith. I've seen miracles. I've seen God, work. I've seen him take a drunk at 2 a.m. and minister to him. Those are things I've never seen in my life. And then, now I've got freedom, and I'm going to explore the unexplored, the other areas of life. And by the way, we'll listen to every one of those stories if you want to tell them about Dad and being on the porch at 2 a.m., because I'm sitting here and I've already got a picture in my head. But I'm curious as to, in this realm of you've met Cheryl, you are coming to terms with the reality that you want to be 3, not just 2, that you want God in your relationship. What do you tangibly do at that point? So you found a church. I'm guessing you're becoming faithful in that, but I'm curious as to how you begin leading in your own home, leading in your own relationship with Cheryl. I mean, she seems, I don't know her very well, so I don't want to make estimations, but she seems like a pretty capable woman. We'll put it that way. I have a sneaking suspicion if I got to ask the question of which is more difficult to lead as a home or a large construction business, I might already know the answer to that. But how did you begin leading in that capacity of, all right, we're going to be 3? Poorly.
Yeah, poorly. Because now I'm an old guy taking on this responsibility and not really knowing what to do, because it was not something I had done.
Right.
Leading, being the man of the house and taking that role of leadership is just not something you walk into and you put on a clean shirt and you're good to go. It takes some history. It takes some sharing from other people, some community, some things like, and somebody, hey, what do I do here? It's not something, I was going to say you can't Google it. I've never tried that, so I guess I can't say that for sure. Don't know that I would like to. I don't know. Now I might do it just to see. But,
AI will sort you out.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, it's the search just became one of hit and miss for me. Getting to know people, leaning on people, understanding what they do, how they do it. But again, just always trying to focus more on almost said, what would Jesus do? And this sounds kind of weird, but that's kind of where I was. How do you handle this when? And then trying to be a good example as a father to our son, Logan. I didn't want him to have to go through the things that I did. Understanding that faith is strong, faith is important. It drives, it motivates, it's who we are. But at the same time, being able to understand and experience other things and knowing the difference between right and wrong, that it is black and white, not getting lost in the middle like I did, but being able to gravitate toward God wants and needs for us, both as a family and individually. And then the same thing for my wife, and she just reminded me that sometimes I was missing the mark. And I love her for that, because again, it's like, it would make me angry at the moment. Human factor kicks in, like, ugh. But really, the reality is, she was right. And so you have to take a different approach, take a step back. What do I need to do? Where do I go? How do I lead? What does my family need at this point? Obviously, I'm not giving it. How do I do that? So became at that time digging deeper, reading the Word, reading books, doing some things like that getting some outside help, and at the same time becoming invested in small groups, actually leading a small group. Not that I had any position, that it's not something that I probably should have been doing, and by most standards, you don't lead. Well, what do you mean we're leading? But what that did was it made me dig deep. What is it, what does it take to teach? You have to know. In order for me to know, I had to study. In order to study, I had to dig deep. And so it was it's great for me to take that position, and that really helped us through a lot of stuff. So we did that for a number of years. Developed a core group of people that was pretty awesome, that drew strength from, and still do today with several of them. So it was just a strong bond that was developed, not just for Cheryl and I, but for that group. Yeah. So again, community expanded a little bit.
That's awesome. Good. I think the one thing that I've been really challenged with lately in trying to communicate well what that leadership looks like in the home, God has called us to love our wives as Christ loved the church, to love our wives as we love our own bodies. It says in Ephesians 5, no man hates his own body. Yet, a lot of times when we think of the leadership of the home as it relates to our kids specifically, we get this model idea of, we have to have a specific sit-down devotional time. We got to use a devotional book. We have to have a 30-minute thing, and all these shaped things. And I was thinking about this when you talked about your dad laying on the back of the third hole, talking about Elijah and the chariots of fire. The leading happens in modeling your relationship with Christ. Yes, there are planned strategic moments that you might be in the Word together as a family, but the observations in creation, what God is teaching me, man, I'm learning this week. I love the weeks that I preach, because it's literally like my family will learn 1 Kings 21 all throughout the week, because I'm sharing, like, you guys, I've read this passage 40 times and I've never seen this before. So there's a difference in the depth of study when we're wanting to present. Like, I want to know this to the best of my possible abilities. I'm limited in my faculties, so how can I know this to the best of my ability to present? Not because of any self appropriation, but literally God's word is so rich, and it's so deep in its intent to bless my heart and to direct attention to the glory of who God is. So as I'm relating that to my kids, you step back and you go, oh, that was awesome. I led. It wasn't like a pre-planned leading. As God's working in my heart, it's an overflow. And so as you're explaining even how small groups affected you in that leadership piece, I'm picturing this as you're digging in, diving in. It's being witnessed by family, And no doubt there's overflow into the life of your son and your wife.
Yeah, and I certainly hope that it even appears intentional.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when it was not.
Yeah.
There's sometimes, the fake it till you make it kind of thing. I'm a strong believer in that. I know where I want to be, so I'm just, I got to push and do what I know to do to get there, and all of a sudden it becomes a reality. And I that's awesome. I kind of take that same approach in business. As we talk about walking out faith and walking out in our relationships. Relationship is important, and then the realization that, wow, I don't need to carry this out in my family, but if I'm working, I can't be one guy at work and one guy at church and one guy at home. There's got to be some consistency in who I am if I'm a real person. If my faith is strong and this is who I want to be, then people need to see that regardless of what hat I have on.
Amen.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where.
Yeah, and that's a perfect inlet, because I want to walk down that road. But what I'm hearing is your willingness to take a risk. I mean, stepping into a small group as a leader when you don't feel capable and equipped is a risk. They might find out I don't know all this stuff, so I better get in the Word and study, right? I think we feel that anytime we stand on the stage and are about to speak, there is a burden to know God's Word so that we can be decent stewards of God's Word. But you're doing that in your faith journey. Your wife's kind of giving you a purpose and a reason to dive in. You're realizing it. I got to lead this family, so I better figure this out. And you're taking risks along the way and taking these steps to build into and to be in community. And like you said, this plays out in your work life, which I know just enough about this story, and my memory is never as good as I want, so I'd love to be able to rehear it, is there's some risk in your business life as well. I remember you sharing with me kind of the story of Lakeshore's accidental birth, and it sounds as if that same philosophy of take the risk, learn the stuff, fake it till I make it, may have played out in that. Would you share a little bit of that and where it connects?
I'll see what I can do. The story of Lakeshore and its inception it's a total God story, and I share that often, not because of who I am, but who God is and has become through what we do, and so that part is just it's just amazing. I got to back it up just a little bit. Moving up, I was in business in the Lansing area at a commercial construction company there, and 7 other companies as well, kind of doing what I do, I guess. Not seeking God was the main thing, but doing all these things that I wanted to do in business, and got involved with a developer that decided at the end of the day he didn't need to pay for anything, and it left me way short in trying to take care of things. End of the day, I shut down 7 businesses that were doing okay. Shut down bankrupted my commercial construction company, and then kind of tried to pick up the pieces, take care of who I could take care of. Just kind of tuck my tail and like bury my head and like, okay, this is not good. A lot of lives affected adversely. So in all of that, I had one of the partners of the developers, the development team, partner came up and offered me, amongst other things, he offered me 2 condos that he had in Manistee. They were on the river. He said they got mortgages on them, but there's a lot of equity there. If you want those, I'll give those to you. And I know it's not everything, but at least I'll give you a little something. I said, I don't know anything about Manistee. Never been there, but sounds interesting. I'll go check it out. So I went and checked it out, and I just really fell in love with the place. Walking into an area where small town, small community, didn't know a soul. Nobody knew me. Didn't know what I was going through or anything about it. So it looked inviting to me. It was almost like I could start over. So it's kind of neat. And how I got there was not so good.
Right. And I was just going to say, because that offer came out of a place of, we got to sort out some business. And I don't want to tell your story and I don't want to dig too deep, but it wasn't an ideal situation. There's a lot of tension there. And it's like, hey, the best I can do is give you these, not quite upside down condos. There's some equity there. Like, this is a concession of trying to make right something that had gone pretty wrong. And if I remember correctly, you're in a tough spot at this point, because all of these debts, all of these things are weighing on you pretty heavy.
Absolutely.
And wasn't there a walk, the meeting that kind of broke things up? Didn't you end up deciding you were walking away from that, literally?
Oh, yeah.
See, this isn't even fair. Part of the story. I don't know any of the story.
I'm bringing
now
it.
You got to tell.
Yeah. So that puts me in Manistee and looking. So I wanted to be there. Ended up moving there. Went to work for a company based out of Holland.
Okay.
Great bunch of guys there. We're still friends. But they needed some money to run Northern Michigan for them, which I said, okay. So at the end of the day, that's kind of where all that went. Went to work with this company. Was doing okay. I was doing good for them. But still focused on business and just trying to run from the past and things that happened. Trying to get healed up mentally, emotionally, all on my own. And you know where that goes. So anyway, we're going through some things, and things happened. I was being successful by world standards in this company, doing well. Get employee of the month and all this kind of fun thing. And then one day, I was just busting it for these guys. Cheryl just accused me even then of just working too much. These guys are taking advantage of you and all that. But one day, it was vacations to me were just something I didn't do. But there was a time of the year that was extremely important. It had been for my brothers and I. I was deer hunting. So come the 15th, we kind of scheduled our time around. This particular year, we hunted up in the UP for years. This particular year, we were hunting in Manistee, Utah Hills on the Manistee River. Beautiful spot. Amazing. If you haven't been there, I encourage you to go there. So took a couple of days off, and we went hunting. And that particular day, opening day was on a Thursday. And Wednesday night, we were just hanging out like us guys did. And I got a call that my two of the directors of the company that I was working with, they called and said they wanted to meet tomorrow, which was opening day. Okay, first off, I never took a vacation. They knew that it was important. It's that none of that was an issue. So I knew whatever they had to say was some sort of a big deal. And so I agreed to go meet them. So we went to the fanciest place in Manistee that we could find, which was Burger King. Yeah. and that's where we met. Where they shared their they started off was things just aren't working out. You just aren't doing the things that we think that you should be doing. And it just kind of was going down this dark path. And I was really kind of troubled by all that. And because these are guys that I had respected. And we had built a relationship. And so it was like, okay, this is getting hurtful. So I just stopped. I said, I don't know what's going on here. But last month, I'm employee of the month. And today, you're talking to me like this. We just need to have a clear understanding that you can talk to me. If you've got plans, something else that you want to do, let's don't make it about anything except what's going on for real. I respect you. You haven't lied to me. Please don't start now.
Yeah.
And so from that, it's like, okay, you're right. Thank you. We have seen that the future of things is not bright. We want to pull things in and rein things in back to our local area and maintain a local business. This was in 2005. So they was foreshadowing what was coming with the economy.
Yeah, 2008.
Smart guys.
Mm.
So then from that, I was like, okay, that makes sense. So here I am now. I kind of all of a sudden I start internalizing all this stuff. I'm getting fired.
Mm.
And they can say it however you want, but that's what it was. So here I am. We're going into the winter season in northern Michigan. I'm an old guy that does nothing but build stuff where the economy is tanking. This doesn't look good.
Mm.
Right? So, kind of one of those take a deep breath moments, like, okay, God, what do we have here? So after some continued conversation about what they needed and wanted, they said, we need to have your company card, your computers, your files, all this stuff. And okay, so I jumped in my truck, ran home, loaded everything that was theirs into their car, and I drove it back to Burger King. I said, just wait for me. It won't take me too long. I'll read all the stuff. I'll be back. And so they did. I always wanted to ask what they did, during that hour that I was gone. It's only so many burgers you can eat or whatever. One of these days I'll ask. So anyway, I came back, gave them their stuff, and we shook hands, parted ways, and they said, okay, can we give you a ride home? I said, no. You've done enough for me today. I'm just going to take a walk. That's where the walk came in. And so I just started walking home. And it was only a couple miles. It was not that big a deal. And then Cheryl said, why didn't you call me? So, well, they took my phone too.
Goodness.
We're going to give it all. So it was a long but much needed walk where I was able to just try and sort things out. No clear decisions made. One of the things that they had me do, the last thing that I did with them, I had just signed a contract for a major company. I'd been working on that for months and months and months. Finally got ironed out, signed a contract. I had to call and rescind the contract because they didn't want me handling it. This is all up north stuff. They didn't want to do that. So let's just get rid of that. You haven't started anything, so let's be done. So we did that, put that away. So walking home thinking, got my truck again, went back out to deer camp. Of course you do.
Mm-hmm.
Got with my brothers and a close family friend. And we just prayed. We just had a prayer meeting. Now it's time to talk. Don't know what God has in this. Walked away from that with just such a sense of peace. That was something that I don't know that I've ever even yet today experienced. So I knew that God was at work, and I felt comfortable in that. My family was there, my brothers, and my friend, and that's what come of that. So it was just later that the next day that the people that I had been working with rescinded the contract with, said, you've done all this. You've put this together. We've worked only with you. We don't know anyone else. Why don't you just do this thing? So I thought, who else could orchestrate this? And so quick, I got with Cheryl. We threw some pennies together. Had to have liability insurance policies on it. I was building a business in just a matter of hours. Came up with this business that is now Lakeshore Construction. Monday, went to work, and for that company, I've been working with them ever since. They are now my largest client. We work in 40 states across the country.
Good.
And it's just something that, like I said, there's no way anyone could take credit for any of that. There's just no way. So it's not even something I think about. What did you do? Nothing. Said yes.
Yeah.
So it's just been amazing what God can do in things and in situations. And it's so easy for me to think about that. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? And thinking back on what happens, like, God's got this. I don't know how sometimes.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's okay. But yeah, sometimes I just got to stop and take a breath. Like, my goodness, and it's been it's been quite a ride. And Cheryl reminds me even now, sometimes funny. We'll have major events, Christmas parties, and all that kind of stuff. And you remember when you said you'll never have a company, you'll never have employees, yeah, honey, I remember.
Yes, dude. Thank you for the reminder.
So we kind of laugh about that now, but God has just blessed in such amazing ways with that.
It is absolutely remarkable. As I sit here and I listen, I've always been a really strong advocate for remembering the past, what God has done. I think Scripture is ripe with the reality that we are to remember. Joshua's 12 stones, they cross the river, and God tells them, put up some stones so you can remember where you've come from. And these pieces and parts of how God acted, you look all through the Old Testament, it's one story after another of Israel forgetting what God had already done for them, going back out and doing the same stupid things. And in our lives, it's very much the same. We'll go do the same stupid things until we start to realize what God has already done and begin to put our trust in Him and to be able to be faithful to that. But I got to level with you. It seems a little bit different as I'm like, I love to see how God moved in that, adjustment in my work, whatever it is. And I've got some stories that are similar, just on so much different a scale, right? None of them include 40 states that my company is now involved with. And I don't mean that to prop you up. I acknowledge that because I think sometimes I speak to people and they've leveled the playing field so weird that they think that God can do all of these things. Yes, God has done all these things, but He could never, or He would never, for me, allow my business to be outwardly successful. He would never allow us to expand and have a footprint over 40 states. He would never, it would never include millions of dollars. Why would God ever trust me with millions of dollars? Well, because you were faithful with little, and therefore He could let you be faithful with more. I know that's part of the story for you, because not all those companies were multi-million-dollar companies and all those things, but God saw a faithfulness as you grew in your faith. And then when He saw that you were ready to follow, all right, let's go. Let's see how this goes. And what strikes me, because I do know just enough behind the scenes to know that Lakeshore Construction is a very successful company. What you guys are able to do, the fact that you've been able to hit the time frames and working with us that you did is astonishing to me, because not all construction companies are particularly good with time frames. However, what has always struck me is how you interact with your employees on a faith level. And I know for a fact that a lot of my friends that are in business, people that go to this church, really struggle with it. It's like, no, those have to be separate. Faith and business must always stay separate. And I worked for businesses like that dictated that to me as an employee. But when you're not an employee and it's your business, it seems a little different. So I'd be interested to hear, after all of that, you've come to a place where Cheryl's reminding you at the company Christmas fair, you didn't even think you'd have employees, and now we've got who knows how many. I'm betting you know. But now you have to determine where your faith is going to play out in success as well as seeming failure. How do you manage that? And specifically to those that are in that world telling themselves that lie that these two things are separate, any advice, any thoughts there?
Yeah, there's no such thing as separate. Again, we talked about that early on. You're either in or you're out. So either walk your faith and show your faith, or you don't. And people can see that just immediately. So when you deal with people from a position of faith and Scripture and all that, it's hard to go back to anything else. I shouldn't say that. It's sometimes easy to go back to other things, but you know that that's not the right thing. Again, the black and white. Leading people is always going to be difficult because of the human factor. Because we're all designed differently and yet all created by God, we all are unique in ways, but at the same time, we're all similar in many ways. And so that when something bothers a person, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to bother you. I have to remind people often that if you're really trying to offend me, you got to remind me, because I'd hate to miss a good opportunity to be offended.
Yeah, that's right.
So you got to treat me a little differently. So if you want to offend me, you got to let me know. Most people, I find, are not that way. You deal with the sensitivities or history or past, things that are going on presently with them that are creating them to think other ways. And so when you're dealing with people, employees, you always have to handle things differently. You look at things differently. And I think that's just one of the keys. Being Christ-centered certainly makes that easier. I hope that someday I can be a leader like Jesus was or is. When he walked the earth, he was a leader. And the things that he did and how he handled things in different situations, as you read about his ministry, 3 short years of stuff, he dealt with more than I will ever deal with. And the way that he did that was amazing. Again, I only hope that I can mirror a portion of that. And if that can happen, then we can make real change. When we make real change, then we get the stories of my guys calling, say, hey, you won't believe what happened today. I was just walking and we're working, and it was talking about some things that happened in my life, and this guy was listening and started asking questions. I was able to share Christ with him. I'm meeting with him and his family tonight. We're praying. We're talking about things. That's real life, real time things that happen.
Praise God.
And yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And so when you start talking work stories, that's a work story that's worth listening to and paying attention to. That stuff that is so cool.
Yeah.
And being able to help people and walk with people through things. And we joke that, not joke, Lakeshore's in a position where we can help people. I have a special calling towards helping pastors. Guys that have been beat up, kicked around, walked on, abused and used, all in the name of Christ because they love what they do and who they follow. And yet people can just beat you bloody.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you guys, we get that. We talk about, you just work, and all this. So I currently have 4 pastors that work for me across different parts of the country. Some local.
Yeah.
And it's just always amazing that Lakeshore can take care of those guys in ways that we minister to them, and at the same time, we can train them. You don't have to be a preacher on Sunday morning. A lot of them are suit and tie, dress up, and okay, we're going to be preachers now. But on a daily basis, no, you wear your faith on your sleeve when you walk on a job site. Yeah, it's because Jesus allowed you that opportunity to be here today.
Yeah.
And let's talk about it in that way. Let's be real. We're not Bible thumpers, but we're going to tell it like it is because of who Jesus is through us. Right?
So good.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. Question for you. I can look back at my time in ministry. I can see the positives in places that I've been. I can see trials and difficulties in previous ministries. Coming into this ministry, I can see how God utilized each of those experiences, positive and negatives, to make me a better version of myself and to prepare me for the position that he's called me to currently. As you look at what the world would deem as the opposite of successes in those previous business endeavors, what are, and there's probably a myriad of things that you've learned in how you want to treat your employees and partners and all those things now, but what are 2 maybe takeaways of where you can look back now and say, man, those are really hard times, but God, you taught me this, which has made me better in the space that you've given me now? Or did anything come to mind specifically?
Yeah, one specifically is perspective. Having a Christ-like perspective versus a earthly or worldly perspective as to what's going on, how you deal with things. Right? We're taught in construction and business management. Construction law, this was a big one. You look at every document, everything that you put out there, and you have to interpret it from at least 3 different ways. It's not just right or wrong. But there's 3 different ways of interpretation of just that. And so that mindset, if you apply that, the business application, into how we deal with things and how we deal with people and talk with people, when we're talking, 3 different things can come to mind. Where you're from, where you came from, who you are today, and what you're looking at to happen tomorrow, and just the conversation we're having now. So how do you interact with all of that? But you keep that in mind. I don't mean to get all like psychologically goofy here, but it keeps things in perspective when we're dealing with people. People are hurting because we're human. A lot of people are coming out of hurt, dealing with hurt, looking at a potential problem or hurt. And so hurting people hurt people. And when you deal with that, when you're dealing with issues at work, it's typically something has been hurt or is going to be hurt. And that's how you're dealing with that hurt situation. And having the ability to look into that and say, okay, where's that coming from? What's led up to this? And what's going to be happening with this in the future? So let's take a look at this and pick it apart, and let's see if we can make it work. Let's bring it back in, and then how can we deal with it?
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome, but it's difficult. It's hard to come by. I've been trying to do this for a long time, and it's only recently that it's not becoming easier, becomes more challenging. A lot of things, it becomes more challenging because of the people that we work with, that we want to mentor, we want to lead them, we want to do these things. They're part of the same community that we're in. And when the struggles come with those people that we're close with, home, church, family, all that, it becomes more challenging. You can take a guy off the street and talk to him. We have these conversations, and it's easy. You take a guy that you live with, people that you live with, that you worship with, now it becomes a challenge. That's when God has to intervene and say, okay, we need help with this one.
Yeah, no question.
Perspective or not, man, we pick this apart all day long. This is going to be hard.
Yeah.
So
That's
I hear a consistent theme throughout of what you're just sharing. There's a perspective where an employee who is experiencing hurt will lash out potentially, and you could take offense at the hurt that they're dishing towards you. But you having and seeking the mind of Christ, you're saying, I see past that hurt that you're hurtling, and I want to delve deep into what the hurt is in your life so that we can solve that together as brothers in Christ.
Yeah.
Love that perspective.
Yeah.
So good. The people pleaser in me, the part that wants to be loved by everybody, when there's something lashed at me, it's my first fleshly inclination is to internalize that and be like, well, I failed in something there, instead of seeing the broader picture. There's a former hurt, there's an experience, there's a current life situation, scenario, circumstance that is, I'm just seeing the overflow of what's going on in a heart, and it's directed at me because it was the easiest. Really delving in, there's this beauty that happens in reconciliation, because not only is it a reconciliation of that personal interaction, but also an opportunity to speak into what's going on in their heart and their life. And so I'm blown away by your perspective on that. Thankful that God's working in your heart in that way, and the fruit of that is evident, and which is even greater. So good.
in so many different places. Yeah, I'm pointing to Colossians 3, by the way. This is a verse that I've had sitting up in front of me the whole time, just because it's where I happened to open the Bible app too, and it was there and it was highlighted. It's one I've highlighted in the past. As you're talking, I'm like, yeah, there's some consistency to the theme that he's. So let me read the consistency to the theme that you've been speaking about. If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above and not things that are on earth. And it's, as you talk about the trials, the risks, the challenges, all of the pieces that have led you to where you are, and how you deal with people. Because let's be honest, being a leader in a company, it's not about the dollars and cents, it's about people. It all comes down to people. Whether you're leading within ministry, whether you're leading a business, whether you're the owner of the business, people are the most challenging piece. They're also the most amazing piece. And it's easy to say, I'm going to seek the things above, and I'm going to be more worried about Jesus than about my business. Cool. That's one level of this. But when it's actually in practice, it sounds like it means sitting down with an employee that's really a challenging employee, maybe not getting the job done. And I'm going to take a wild guess that it doesn't always work out with that employee continuing to be a part of the business, right?
That's true.
The hard reality is that sometimes letting somebody go from a business is what God has in store there. Might not be comfortable, might not be, but it is often the best situation for the organization and all the people involved, because if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. I do a ton of interviews, have in the past just done a ton of interviews, a little different level than what you're often doing. But one thing that I realized right off the bat is putting a person into a company that they're going to hate, into a situation that they're going to be unhappy with. If they're lying to me in the interview, and I know they're lying to me to get a job because they're just desperate for a job, it's not going well for either of us. It's the same on the back end. In those disciplinary conversations that we often look at, when we can choose to love somebody, see them as a human being first, try to sort through it alongside them, shoulder to shoulder, things tend to work themselves out. We find that people move on. I mean, we've had some amazing people lately that have moved on, and the connection points there are pretty cool because we know that God is working together for all things, right? And trusting that means trusting the process even when it's uncomfortable, not just when I love it because sometimes people tell me, they're like, doors will just open and things will work out and everything will be perfect if God's involved with it. And I was like, what God do you serve? Have you read the Old Testament? Like, it exists. Sometimes there's fire and brimstone involved. Right?
That's good.
But
that's tough. One of the things that in the hiring process that I still find challenging is that I don't hire a person for a short term. I don't look at it that way. And so when things go sideways, I look at that as a failure on my part. I'm not giving them what they need, not instructing them in how they need to be instructed, not giving them opportunities to succeed, but I'm being completely active in their failure.
Right.
Because I can't do that. And I struggle with that. So that becomes a real challenge. And there's some guys that I've worked with that, man, it doesn't matter what I do, how I do it, what I try to do, change titles, change whatever it is to try and make something work. Sometimes it just doesn't
work.
And we refer to that company-wide. And if guys listen to this thing, they'll understand. We encourage them to go be happy because obviously you're not happy here.
Yeah.
So go be happy.
I love it.
If you use that on me now, I'm going to know where you got it. No, Gary, that's phenomenal. I actually sat with a local organization that brought in some community members. I want to try to be cautious on how I phrase this because I was very impressed by the leader of this organization and how they were doing it. But the whole point of the meeting, their board and their administration and all these people got together in a room and they're like, how do we retain employees? And it brought back to me just like flashbacks of, restaurant level turnover. It's insane, right? And the question is always, how do you hire? How do you retain? How do you, And what I hear you saying is care about them. It's a good first step. From the interview to the end, if you actually care about them as Christ cared about people. Now, that couldn't be said in that organization. So there's committees formed, and there's what if we pay more, and and there's 73 items on the list that we're going to try to do going forward. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I raise my hand, and I go, guys, a mission and a vision statement's awesome. It's really important. But if it doesn't drive the culture of the place that you work, and that's as close as I can get to the Christ conversation in this avenue. It's like, if it doesn't drive the culture of the place that you work, it doesn't matter. I worked at a restaurant that had the highest turnover in the district. And when God moved me, and that's a cool story in itself, he put me in this different position. One of my primary roles was to figure this situation out. I went everywhere in town looking for new places, new ways to hire. I did all these things that my business leadership books had taught me to do. And they all fell flat. And when we decided as a team, hey guys, servers, cooks, people that are working here, we're going to change how we treat each other, how we act toward each other. how we enjoy work. We're going to change how we schedule you because we're going to care about your opinion. We're going to make these adjustments. And we weren't perfect. We were still, a restaurant that was corporate, and I didn't have all those choices, but we made those attempts. It changed the culture. And within, I think it was a year and a half, we had completely shifted. We were the most well-staffed store in the entire district. And at the point in which I left, most of us, I remember telling God, all right, God, if this is what you got for me for the rest of my life, I'll do this. Mind you, I hated that job a year prior. I wanted out. So, yeah, I think that we pigeonhole this business perspective. Surely God could not involve himself in the affairs of man and their finances and their businesses. God created it all.
Right. Yeah, that's why we're here. And yet we dog that, oh, surely God wouldn't want to have. And yet that's why we're here today.
Awesome.
So when you write the book, Gary, like the leadership book on this, I would just like to offer that I would edit this for you. And then Adam will point out the fact that I'm actually the worst editor in history. I can't even do my own
possible.
grammar. Yeah.
Quite possible.
So you might not want that, but Gary, so we're at a point where we've been rolling for a little bit. I think that there's an avenue for a ton more conversation, but we did hit a lot of the bigger points. But is there anything that we didn't hit that you would feel that it's just like, hey, I'm not gonna? Oh, Adam's got at least one.
I got at least one question. End result of that deer hunt back with you and your brothers and close friend.
6 point.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
See, so, God was blessing.
Yeah, there was peace and there was a 6 point. So that's success, right? Good. And then a thought to one thing that Martin pointed out. He said in referring to a testimony, if I misspeak here, it's not intentional. I believe that you might have even used the term that my testimony is a little bit boring in that I didn't delve into sin. And you referred to not everybody has a testimony like my past, that kind of thing. And I think for the listener, sometimes because I grew up in this perspective where, you'd hear the guy get up and he tells his testimony of this massive transformation, all that God did. And I would almost lament the fact that I have a pure background. Like I grew up in church. I didn't really rebel. God has been faithful, those kind of things. And it's kind of like, okay, so how about my story? Where does that story fit? And somebody said something to the effect of this. I wrote it down so I didn't botch it too bad. Some will have a testimony of what I did and how God saved me. Others, it is a testimony of what I didn't do and what God saved me from. And I think for the listener, it's an important perspective to be able to step back and go, God, you are so faithful and so good, because every testimony of a past has a testimony of scars and has a testimony of the hurts that they had to work through. And there is a beauty in being able to say, I didn't have that past. God saved me from that or rescued me from that before it even happened. And just a perspective for listeners, we also have a testimony. Gary has a testimony, and I'm so thankful, man. I want to hear more. I want to get to know you better. Thankful for your heart for the Lord, heart for people, heart for pastors. It's one of the reasons that even the position that I'm in here, I felt so called to this is the desire to care well for our team here and for our pastors. And I've had some amazing experiences in life, but also felt some of those hurts. And so being able to love our team well, to the best of my flawed abilities is it's something that I'm burdened for, but also look forward to seeing our team continue to grow and thrive as we pursue Christ. And super thankful for you sharing your heart with us today and your testimony of faithfulness. Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's an amazing testimony. And I get that maybe you didn't have to deal with all the junk, but what God did through and in the midst of the business realm, man, it's got to be told. It's got to be shared. I think that this podcast will have a more narrow reach, but for the individuals that this is it, there's not a lot of voices out there speaking it. I mean, there's some amazing ones, but it feels sometimes in the business world like you're alone and you're separated. You're on an island away from God instead of the other. So I'm grateful for that. But to that question, is there anything that we didn't give you the opportunity to that you'd like to weave into this? And then we'll do our goodbyes. We'll wrap things up a little bit and probably see where.
Yeah, I just want to take a second just to speak to the business thing, and because there are business people in our area, our community, that seek Christ in what they do and who they are. Some better than others in expressing how that goes and how that works with their employees. But I'm encouraged by that. I used to think that this is a new thing, and I am just very glad to say that no, it's not a new thing. This is something that when people seeking God and wanting to share that and how to walk it out in the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, that's not isolated.
Right.
So there's more. And I'd like to get to know more of those guys because the camaraderie is just amazing. When you get together and share these kinds of stories. So things that God does. So.
I got a couple of phone numbers for you because in my mind, again, always drawing out the next podcast thought process, it's getting you around the table with a few of those guys that I know in this area from Buckley that, man, you guys all have a similar perspective. You're doing it well. And in honesty, I probably could ask any of them to have this conversation, and some of them will, but some of their testimonies are in difficult times at the very moment. So they'll value that conversation as well.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's a massive difference between a business that throws the Jesus fish on the symbol to be like, hey, there is a pseudo level of Christianity here, or we want the God factor just so that maybe that expands our reach. There's a massive difference between that type of business and one that says, hey, we're going to live this out at the very ground human levels. And so just truly thankful for your faithfulness to that. And I think the continued fruit is God's blessing for honoring him and his word in that space. So really appreciate you, man. And we will wrap this up for now, and we'll determine here afterwards whether this is just part one, because I can see a part two coming real quick as we expand on this idea.
Basically, Gary's going, hey, you do know I run a business, not
okay.
just a podcast.
That's okay.
Like you.
Maybe we'll get this
Part-timers.
mobile podcasting thing up, and we can just find him where he's at. And so next one we'll have the sounds in the background.
I like that.
Right, Matt?
Sounds of saws and cuts and fun.
Yeah. Well, we're super thankful for those that are listening to us today. A reminder that when you hear this podcast, the final sermon in the series, 1 Kings 22, will be wrapping up that following Sunday. We encourage you and invite you, as always, to tune in to the preaching of God's Word as we do our very best to be faithful to it in context. We love the Lord. Hopeful that you hear that throughout our podcast, throughout our preaching, and thankful for the time spent today with our special guest, Gary Buren, and our good friend, still, even after 7 months of working here, Martin Rizzi, as well as our producer, faithfully, Matt Hughes. And God is good, and we look forward to sharing that with you further in days to come.
Don't forget, there is always an opportunity to subscribe, like, share, connect. This podcast needs to be heard. We've said it. I think you agree with it. So give it to somebody.
That's right.
That's all socials are good for anymore, right?
That's right. Yeah, share it with someone that could be influenced and encouraged by it.
All right, Tab fam. It's been fun. Can I do the close?
Do the close. I
I'm gonna screw up
kind
the
of
close.
did like a little bit of close there, and I was about to wrap up the close. Then you talked again.
Then I
and
jumped
now
in there.
now
I was
it's
like, I really
awkward.
want to do the close because I chickened out on the opening every time.
It's okay.
It's terrifying.
Good. Close.
All right. All right, Tab fam. It's been fun with me, Adam Ray, Mr. Matt Hughes, and our guest, Gary Buren. Thanks so much, man.